Good morning. So nice that we're all together again, meeting online and in person. We are a group of people, we call ourselves Dublin Vineyard, but what we're characterised by is we're a community gathered around a transforming friendship, the transforming presence of Jesus. We've encountered him and have found that following him is the opportunity of a lifetime, to become the kind of people he made us to be, the kind of people we always wanted to be. So you're welcome no matter where you are joining us from, but I'm assuming most of us are in Dublin. And back in September, we did a 4-week series called Living an Unhurried Life. And a lot of people found it really helpful. And if you didn't hear it, you can go on to our YouTube channel to have a listen to it. But it's not surprising that people found it helpful because we all live such busy lives. So this week and next week, what I want to do is look at one ingredient that goes into living an unhurried life. And that one ingredient, there's a number, but the one we look at is the weekly practice of Sabbath. So what is Sabbath? Sabbath is one day each week when you rest. Now, it includes rest as we would normally understand it, but it's so much more than that involved in it. And so I'm going to use the term Sabbath rest to differentiate it from normal rest. Now, please don't glaze over or switch off, because some of us might think, I'm way too busy. I could never take off a day to rest. Like, I work, I study. When I'm not working, when I'm not studying, I've laundry to do, I've shopping to do. I just don't have time to rest. Or some of us can kind of, like, if we've been Christians a while, if we've been following Jesus for a while, we kind of think of it as kind of an optional extra, this Sabbath thing. You've heard people talk about it, but it's not really that important. Or you might even think it's just Old Testament law. It's irrelevant to the Christian life today. A bit like ritual hand washing, which they used to do as part of their ritual before meals. And actually, to be honest, I'd agree with you, ignoring the Sabbath teaching. If Sabbath was just my idea, or someone's idea, but it's not my idea, it's not any person's idea. Sabbath is God's idea. And I think it's safe to assume that God is really wise. And even if there's no way that we could see ourselves practicing Sabbath because we're so busy, but if God is God, then at least we have to stop and think about Sabbath, because he seems to think it's a really good idea for his people. And maybe, just maybe, God knows what he's talking about. And maybe if we listen to him and learn from him as his apprentices, we'll experience more of the kind of life that he seems to offer, that often seems outside our grasp, but he's offering this life to the full. Now, as we look at Sabbath and the possibility of incorporating it into our lives, we really need to pay attention to the lens we view Christianity as a whole through. If you like, we really need to think about our thinking when it comes to what Christianity really is. Because I found from my own life, and Debbie, my wife, in her life, one of the most transformational understandings that you can come to as a follower of Jesus is that to follow Jesus, in other words, to be a Christian, it isn't about keeping a list of rules that are in the Bible. It isn't even about behaving well. To follow Jesus is to enter into a relationship with him, a relationship that changes you, that changes the kind of person you are on the inside. You see, Jesus isn't giving us a list of rules to live by, but extending an invitation into a new and a different kind of life. And he's offering to make you and me a new and a different kind of person. So he says, learn from me how to be a certain kind of person who lives a certain kind of life. To be the kind of person he is, living the kind of life he has. So it's not an improved version of the life you have if you just work hard enough at it, but a completely new kind of life, the kind of life Jesus has. So, to reiterate, keeping the Sabbath, or practicing the Sabbath, because it's also a verb, isn't about rule keeping, something we have to do to stay inside the lines. Instead, it's a practice that helps us experience the kind of life that Jesus invites us into. So if Christianity is all about a relationship with Jesus, then Sabbath, properly understood, must be something that fosters that relationship with Jesus and the life he's inviting us into. Let me repeat that. If Christianity is all about a relationship with Jesus, then Sabbath, properly understood, must be something that fosters this relationship with Jesus and the life he's inviting us into. It's kind of like, maybe a silly example, but some couples have what they call a date night. It's not a rule that they have to keep. It's something that they've put in place that fosters their relationship with each other. Well, Sabbath is kind of similar. Because Christianity is about a relationship with Jesus, Sabbath is something God has put in place to help us foster our relationship with him. So now, with that lens, we can begin to understand what Sabbath means and Jesus' teaching in Mark 2:27, when he says to the people, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. What Jesus is saying here is that humanity isn't supposed to serve the Sabbath like a law we have to keep. Instead, Sabbath serves human life, human thriving. Dallas Willard says it this way: Sabbath serves human life in essential ways. Without it, life cannot be what it should be. That is why it is given in the Ten Commandments at the heart of the moral law. It is not something we have to do because God has arbitrarily required it of us, a pointless hoop he would have us jump through. It is his gift to us. Sabbath is God's gift to us, to serve us, to help make life be as it should be. Even that would be good to think about for a while. But this whole thing of seeing Christianity as rule keeping, it's so deeply in me, it's so deeply in most of us, that we really have to think about our thinking the whole time I'm speaking this week and next week. Because the whole time I will be talking about a kind of life, and you and me will be hearing, obey the rules. So let's look in the Old Testament, 2 reasons given for Sabbath. The first one is right at the start of creation in Genesis 2:1-3. It says, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he'd been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating he had done. So in this Genesis account, what can we learn about Sabbath? Well, what it does, it tells us that Sabbath is about resting from work. Now, when you hear people saying, I work 6 days, you kind of think, well, they're tired. They really need a rest. But God wasn't tired. It wasn't like after the 6 days he was just knackered from all the work and he just needed to sit down. So it's not simply you're tired that you need a rest. It's not simply a day off to recover. It's a different kind of rest. Sabbath rest. And what Genesis also tells us is that Sabbath is woven into the rhythm of life that God set into creation. It's in the DNA of creation. And Sabbath rest is woven into your DNA as a human being made in God's image. God rested, we rest. Sabbath is part of the way of living life that God intended. Don't think of rules, but it's a way of living life in which we thrive, living under his constant care. And Sabbath, that idea comes up again and again, because it's about trusting in God's care for us. So we see the same idea of Sabbath and trusting in God's care when the Israelites get manna in the desert, this strange food that appeared every morning while they wandered in the desert. Now, every morning it was there, and they were only to collect enough for each day. Then on the day before Sabbath, they were to collect enough for 2 days. So they would rest on the Sabbath. Even in their farming, when they occupied the land, they were to farm the land, and every 7th year they were to let the land rest and not cultivate it. So they would grow no food in the 7th year. Instead, in the 6th year, God would give them an abundant harvest, enough for 3 years. And like when God was saying, don't do anything on the 7th year, don't do anything with your fields, of course you're going to ask, Well, what will we eat? And this comes up in Leviticus, and it says, you may ask, what will we eat in the 7th year if we do not plant or harvest our crops? Because it's talking about trusting. It's talking about, is God going to care? And it says in verse 21, I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat from the old crop and will continue to eat from it until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. So what we're doing is we're getting a picture of a kind of life that's painted, one that incorporates Sabbath rest, but it's a Sabbath rest based on confidence in the care and provision of God. It's a life who's lived under the experience of the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. So Sabbath has nothing to do with keeping the rules, nothing about hoops that we have to jump through. It's about who God is to you and me. And if you look at Jesus' life, confidence in God's care for him was the characteristic of his life. And that's the kind of life Jesus is inviting us into, where he says he will train us as his apprentices into that kind of confidence in the care and provision of the Father. In any and every circumstance, even in the dark ones, even when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. So the practice of Sabbath is part of that. And then this idea of Sabbath is developed even more in the next explanation of Sabbath that comes in Deuteronomy, which is another book in the Old Testament. And here we read in chapter 5, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest, as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So here, Sabbath keeping is connected with Israel's time as slaves in Egypt. So they were slaves for 400 years. Imagine if your family were slaves right up to 2021 and just got freed. That would be going back to 1621. Every generation in your family in slavery. That's all you've ever known under the tyranny of slavery. And so what this passage is doing, it's contrasting two forms of life. A life of Sabbath rest or a life of constant work, which they experienced in Egypt. And they're being told to remember that a life of constant work is not a good life. Now today, we aren't slaves, at least here in Dublin. At least we're not slaves to any people. Our slavery is actually much more subtle. It's a slavery to constant busyness, constantly doing, constantly going, never stopping, never resting. That's in itself a form of slavery. We don't have Egyptian masters, but we do have a master. The continual demands, the continual expectations the world places on us, that we place on ourselves or others place on us. These things mean we never rest. And we often don't know how to stop, just stop. And when we do, we kind of get antsy, like we're uncomfortable, and we end up doing the hoovering or calling a friend or scrolling through Instagram or Facebook feed. We just have to do something. We just don't know how to stop. And you know, the word Sabbath literally means stop. Stop from your doing so you can simply be. And if we think about Sabbath, not as another rule we have to keep, but part of the design for thriving in life, and contrast that with the world that tells us we have to constantly do, then Sabbath is telling us something about ourselves before God. It's telling us that we are enough before God. Sabbath is saying you are enough. You see, one part of Sabbath is engaging with God and Sabbath. One part in that is saying you, just you, empty-handed, is enough for God. You are enjoyed, you are loved by God for who you are, not for what you do, including what you do for Him. You stopping, doing nothing, are enough for God. You see, God is more interested in you than what you do, and even more interested in you than what you do for Him. It's kind of like Martha and Mary. Martha was busy doing all these good things for God, and Mary simply chose to stop, ignore all the demands of the good things, and to be with Jesus. And Jesus said, you chose the better way. And there really is an element of choice in it. And in one of the books I was reading, they referred to another book called Sabbath as a Resistance, where Walter Brueggemann, he writes this about Sabbath and about you and me. You do not have to do more. You do not have to sell more. You do not have to control more. You do not have to know more. You do not have to have your kids in ballet or soccer. You do not have to be younger or more beautiful. You do not have to score more. You see, we live in a world that tells us we need more. We need one more thing. You must do one more thing, bigger, faster, cooler, better, longer. Rich Mullins was a Christian singer, famous Christian singer when I was younger. One of the lines in his songs goes, everybody I know says they need just one thing. And what they really mean is that they need just one thing more. And Sabbath frees us from one thing more. Sabbath frees us from the bondage of having to have more. It frees us from the accumulation of stuff through our own efforts. And it invites us into a rest, a trusting rest, a confidence rest, a rest based on confidence in our Jesus. What if, this is just something to think about, what if Sabbath is central to experiencing the kind of life that Jesus is inviting you into? What if Sabbath really does serve your life in essential ways, and if we don't practice it, our life is blighted in essential ways? We've been invited to be apprentices into this kind of life, the kind of life Jesus led, where He too practiced Sabbath. It's the kind of life we all wish that we had, the kind of life where we had Sabbath rest and we step out of the rat race of how life is lived today. Now, next week I'm going to try and paint a picture of what are the components of a day of Sabbath rest. I'll try and give us some tentative steps that we can begin to take to incorporate it into our lives, some practical stuff. But for now, remember, Sabbath is also a verb, so it involves action. And we are apprentices, and that involves learning. So this week, if you know deep down you need to slow down for your own health, for your own peace of mind, for your own sanity, for the health of your relationships, and especially for your relationship with Jesus. If you know that even though you might disagree with it and think it's not really that important, it's not important as witnessing or anything like that, but you know Sabbath is part of God's plan for His people, then what I want to do is challenge you with an experiment in slowing down, a first step towards practicing Sabbath. For most of us, doing a 24-hour, just jumping straight into Sabbath rest, it's just too much for us. We couldn't do it. So let's start with something doable. If you think God has been speaking to you through this, then once a week, between now and Christmas, spend 1 hour walking in the park, or on the beach, or sitting on your patio, or on your balcony, or in a comfortable chair, and do nothing. Just stop. Don't take your phone, don't take a book, don't even take your Bible. Just be with Jesus. Don't even talk to Jesus. Just be silent in His presence. When your mind wanders, just bring it back. And what you're doing is you're training yourself in the presence of the Spirit to learn to live the kind of life Jesus was living. So can I encourage you to do that? Do nothing for an hour. So let's just pray. Lord, for so many of us, Sabbath feels like an optional extra. not really central to a life of following you. It's not like witnessing, for example. But the picture you paint seems to make it central to a life of following you. Would you help us think about our thinking? Give us your perspective and understanding so that we can learn from you how to live a life that incorporates Sabbath rest. We ask this in your name, Lord Jesus. Amen.